Welcome, everyone, to Beard of Darkness Book Reviews for yet another amazing guest. I'm so happy. I have to be honest here. I rescheduled on Josh like 5 times because of sickness, the kids. So, a little pretense, he has been the most patient person in the world. And I just appreciate Joshua Shuh. I hope I'm saying the last name right, Shuh.
You are saying it right.
How are you tonight?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I love your background. I'm digging the American flag. I love that.
Yeah, we got the piano in the background and all my textbooks that I occasionally open. Not so much anymore that I used to, but yeah.
Absolutely, and we'll kind of dig into why you've used those textbooks because it's particularly of interest to me for a couple reasons. But we'll dig into that. Um, First, kind of just introduce everybody to your book.
So
And
sure, I think I originally wrote this book in 2018. It's called In a Hotel Room in Chillicothe, and you find out why it's called that at the very end of the book. And I needed something to do while I was in a hotel room in Chillicothe. I actually live in Bowling Green, which is in Northwest Ohio, and Chillicothe is way south of me. It's a 3 hour drive. So where I would work there for 3 or 4 days a week, but I would stay at a hotel room. Usually it was like out by Circleville, like on 23. The and But so the idea of the book is that 7 people get like they all wake up in a room not knowing how they got there, and it's a battle royale. Like every 90 minutes someone is voted on who's the next person to die, so everyone in the room gets to vote. Whoever they vote on is the next person who gets offed, right?
yep,
And I kind of try what I try to do is take like preconceived notions. Like they all have to say something about themselves, right? Like because they're kind of being tortured a little bit by this like mastermind who's running the room. And the so I try to take the preconceived notions that people have about like what they have to say about themselves, and like is a person all good or all bad, right? Like, and I don't really think in terms of like that. Like I think a lot of the times like we get on the internet and like we kind of get put into groups based on our advertising preferences, right? Like and it's really made us kind of a binary society, right? Like you got it there's not a lot of nuance. The and I feel like the first person who I really like got introduced to that kind of nuance was George Martin. Like when I
mhm,
read his books, like I started reading those books before it was like cool to read them. I just stumbled upon them in a Barnes Noble. I'm like, oh, this book looks like something I'd read. And then like by like 80 pages in, and spoiler alert, when Bran gets thrown out of the window, I was like,
yeah,
okay, I'm really in
let's
now.
go.
But then you realize that character, right, who throws him out of the window, like you realize he's not all bad and he's not all good, right? Like later on throughout the course. And that was always like a good thing for just, I thought it was really good writing. It was a really good story because not everyone, it's just so in my books, like there are really no good or bad people. There are just people willing to do certain things like to accomplish their objectives. And whether you agree with their objectives or whether you don't, or is whether you think they're good or bad. So that's kind of how I got started. I just wanted to, my mom used to write, so I would send her these chapters, and I always tried to send her a chapter. I was like a cliffhanger, what would happen next,
Yeah.
But that was and my mom's like, you got to keep going with this, like, and I was like, okay. So I would write another one, and then I had a buddy. My first ever real career, I was a professional magician.
I read
The
that.
Yeah, and a buddy I knew who I used to write for a magic magazine, like he was an editor, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll edit it for you for free. Just give me like," he goes, "if it makes any money," like because I didn't know anything about the book world. You're not going to be rolling in it anytime soon. the
Sure.
And he's like, "If it makes any money, just give me like 5-10% of what the profits are." And I said, okay, that sounds good to me. So he edited the entire thing, and I really got the idea. My friend of mine named Zach Lemon, he's a internal medicine physician. He wrote a book called Vague Pains, and it was all about like a guy who had a chronically ill disease who was in and out of the hospital all the time.
Big pains.
Vague pains. Yeah.
Vague pains.
Yeah. And like he did like kind of a book signing, and I was like, I want to try that. And that's when I initially got the idea. And then on my many drives to Chillicothe, I would drive past on 23 when you drive through Circleville. There's that water tower that looks like a pumpkin.
Yeah.
So for anyone watching this, there's this big thing they do in a town called Circleville, Ohio. It's called the Pumpkin Fest, and it's like this huge. Everything's pumpkin, right?
Yeah.
I would look at that stupid water tower every time, and then it just hit me. I was like, you know what? I think that would be a great place, like a great villain lair, right? Like where they all hang out once a year and do their various nefarious things. So that was like how I got the idea for the bad guy, like, and the bad quote unquote guy.
In case they don't know, real quick, I don't mean to interrupt you. I live in Chillicothe, everybody, and Circleville's like 15 minutes away from me. So him and I have a lot to talk about as far as that. It's like he wrote this book, and the city in the title is where I live. I didn't know if anybody knew that. I wanted to throw it out there because I thought that was super cool, and I know exactly where he's talking about. Go ahead, man. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. But that's, that was like, and then the second sort of inspiration I got is one of my minors in undergraduate was philosophy. And there was a philosopher who I always thought was interesting, and a guy by the name of Ludwig Feuerbach.
I've heard of him.
I hope I'm pronouncing him right, but he's kind of like, he's this weird little known guy who, like, he's kind of in between two philosophical giants like Hegel and Marx. But he had this idea where what he said was that he thought that like all gods, right, like they essentially were just anthropomorphisms of what men felt powerful in that day. So if you looked at like Zeus, right, Zeus was a philanderer. Like he was always cheating on his wife, and his wife was just like this horrible kind of shrew type person, and he said, if you look at that like as designed as an anthropology experiment, like what would, like that just kind of says something about the time period. So I kind of thought about that idea for a little bit, and I was like, what would our gods look like today? Like, right? Like what do we value? What do we hold? And the best answer I came up with is like all these billionaire guys who, like, you got the Zuckerbergs and the
Bezoses.
Jeff Bezoses and all this stuff. And what they really do and what they're really good at is they're just data reviewers.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? Like
they pay big money for the data.
Right? They review data. They review data, and then they try to take that data and accurately put something on your screen that you want to buy, right? So I said, what if you had a guy or a group of people who were like that? They were just essentially, they were like data analyzers. And that's how it kind of all came together. Like, thinking about him looking at a giant pumpkin in Circleville, many
I love that.
And lonely nights in hotels. So yeah.
So if you guys haven't caught it, Joshua is a physician as well. He's a man of many hats, I have to say. Very interesting guy. I think it's very cool. So I'm going to check that Vague Pains out because that sounds really fun. And I think that especially medical doctors have a, depending on, especially, okay, so there's a huge psychological part of this book. In fact, that's what I would say is the biggest part that influenced me. It's like that psychological manipulation / horror. And I really enjoyed it. It was, it went further than most books. So I'm pretty new as far as, I haven't read a million books like a lot of these people have, like in the chats, and started when I was 8. I didn't. So it was really fun to find you, the author, to push that boundary for me. And man, I'm telling you, it was refreshing. So what is it about that psychological kind of manipulation that was there a inspiration? Maybe like, were there movies? I know that you were talking about the gods and what would that look like today? I'll just say, I thought it kind of sounded like Saw, but better.
And I got, it's the irony is that I've never seen a Saw movie.
I believe you.
The and I got compared to another movie called Circle, which I've
Hmm.
also never seen. And I got compared to Squid Game, which I actually wrote this before Squid Game even came out, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So it's
it's
not like Saw, but that's what. So it gave me that initial vibe. Is like this goes much further with deeper themes and like there's a sci-fi element to it, and it was a whole lot of fun. I definitely wouldn't say that it's comparable to that, but that was my initial. Oh, this looks really fun. This is kind of what it reminds me of, and then that gets you on the journey. And I just had a blast, man. It was
I,
so much fun.
I
Um,
think for me the parts that were the best were like the pace, like and the story. I think the like when I've looked at my Goodreads reviews, I try to read the bad ones too and learn something from them. Like as opposed to just like I feel like a lot of people like it's hurtful, right? When you when you get to like people don't I think people the internet is so anonymous these days that people don't realize there's another person on the end of like where they're
there's that
review.
disconnect.
Yeah, and and I mean, I shed a few tears, I'm like, "Oh, they didn't like it."
You're
No,
human. You're human. Yeah.
Yeah, and, but I think the main critique I got, because this was the first book I had ever written, was that the characters felt maybe a little not entirely well-rounded or believable. And I think that's a fair critique. But I also don't know, like it's a novella, so in the short, I think that the real praise I got was for the storytelling and the pace that it set. Like,
Compelling.
yeah. So I'm trying to learn from that. And that was like kind of my real problem, like going forward, is that I realized that I didn't know what I didn't know,
Yeah.
like about writing.
And man, really, I'm sorry if I cut you off, but what you just said is something that will ring. I'll remember that part of this interview forever because it touches why I started this channel. It's like you are after that next level. So you started with this, and you're talking about that process of some authors don't read those reviews, and it's hard to take criticism. I'm terrible at it.
Yeah.
Like my wife's like, dude, you suck at driving. I'm like, no, I don't. So but I think it's very brave to talk about that process. You start with a book, and I often hear stepping stones. um, so I think kind of what I'm getting at is it's just inspiring to know that you're doing something that I want to eventually do, but you're also on your journey as well, and you want to get further in that by honing that craft.
And I did actually, since this book, I've probably written in the last 2 or 3 years uh, easily over 500,000 words.
Wow.
So, and I wrote like two or three of the backstories for like the protagonists in the book, and then I actually stopped and I changed pace. I was going to enter a book in the Spiffbo, right? Like the fantasy stuff. And because I'm on Mark Lawrence's Patreon,
Yeah.
he's a super cool guy. I really
Oh
like him.
yeah, dude. When I interviewed him, the only person he told me that I should interview was you. How
he's
freaking cool is that?
no, he's so great. I mean, if anyone has a chance to like be a part of that, like there's a really great community that he has, like, and that's how I met John. It's how I met Chago Abdallah, who wrote A Touch of Light. Like,
Yep.
and I can't keep up with it. I mean, I try to read them all, right? Like Kian Ardalan is another one who I read the 11th cycle. That book was like,
I haven't read
wow.
that.
You read it?
No, I haven't. I want to.
Oh, it's good. It's very dark, but very good.
That's all. That's all me, man. I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I read A Gamble of Gods by Mitriel Faywood and by Shauna Lawless. You know, her new one out is The Words of Kings and Prophets.
Mm.
Like I want to put, but I sometimes I just can't keep up with all the writers that are in the group. I try, but it's busy. So,
Chiago is a fountain of like just beautiful knowledge, man. I love talking to Chiago. It's like he like you can ask him a question and he will go so deep with it, but at the same time, you're not lost in this conversation. It's like he's talking very human things.
And
It's like
he's just a great guy. He really is a good guy.
yeah.
And John too. John is just he's I had lunch with John over in because he came to Columbus.
He's speaking of John Morrow, guys.
Yeah, and he's a glass guy, right? Like if you've ever used Gorilla Glass, John Morrow. You're
That's
using one of the
Penn
things.
State.
Yeah, but when I sat and we went to Agave and Rye down in Columbus. He's just a genuine human being. Like you just meet so few of those, and he's just a wonderful human. So
I told my wife the other day because I just talked to him on the channel. I have to have him on again soon because like I've had him on twice, and I have that same experience. It's like I told my wife, and I said it so beautiful the other day. I probably won't be able to remember exactly what I said. I said, John is that guy. It's like he's that kind human voice and that voice of reason, and it's just he brings so much wonderful stuff to the table. And yeah, guys, I was talking to John on the channel for the first time. He found out I lived in Chillicothe. He's like, hey, I know a book, and that's why we're here today. So man, John is just one of those community guys. Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, he's a good dude. And then I think the next book I'm set to read that I have on my shelf is The Bloodstones by Tori Tekken.
Oh,
I'm
like halfway through it.
I've heard good things. I bought it, and I just, again, it becomes a time issue, like how much time, and I generally, most of the books I listen to right on auto, because on car rides and stuff. So
Andrew D. Meredith they dropped the audiobook for that. So
really?
Yeah, Andrew D. Meredith did that for her, and they just dropped it like last week or something like that, last 2 weeks.
I'll probably buy that too, because that makes things a lot easier.
I had never read anything by Tori, and I've had her on the channel a couple times, and that's how I knew of her, was her channel. And come to find out, she's a writer. So Phased, her first work, I never read. So I started with Bloodstones. Man, talent.
Is it good? Yeah,
it's solid.
I'm excited to read it, and she's a very nice person too. They're all great people,
Yeah.
But yeah, that the only book I actually stopped reading or I stopped listening to on Audible was Mark's book, the last one that he came out with, which is the
book that wouldn't burn.
Yeah, and because I was listening to it, and I got about like a quarter to a third of the way in, and I'm like, I just feel like this is a book that was meant to be read. I don't feel like this is a book that was made to be listened to. Like there's a difference. I don't know what it was, and I found that I enjoyed it more when I read it.
You literally it's funny you say that because I like to listen at nighttime. So the Kindle's a little bright, the baby's going to wake up, and then we're going to have 4 kids up for 2-3 hours. and that's just not fun, let me tell you. Yeah. And it's like, I downloaded the book that wouldn't burn. And I also have the physical copy, of course. My wife got it for me for my birthday. But I had that same experience as you. Didn't enjoy the audiobook because it kind of lost me, to be honest. It's one of those books you have to really digest.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I agree. It's a read. You got to read it.
Yeah.
So I know you spoke of your mother, which is so cool. I always wished that my mom and dad was like, they're great mother and father. I'm not saying they're not, but they didn't push reading. And I'm not going to push it necessarily. I think that has a bad connotation, but I will invite that into their lives. And if they love it, man, awesome. If not, if they, do their own thing. But I was never given that influence. So I think it's very cool that you speak of your mom that is a writer and how you guys swap back and forth, chapters. So when did you find your love for literature is the question. I can tell that it's pretty early.
Actually, that's a funny story. I would say in 5th grade, I can remember. I actually went to Brown Elementary School in Hilliard, Ohio. I've lived all over the place, but I've lived in Ohio, Texas, Michigan, Florida, Arizona.
You're born in Ann Arbor, right?
Yeah, I was.
I'm a huge Michigan fan. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. You're an unholy country, man.
My mom and dad are from Michigan.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but I'm actually dyslexic, so I had a really hard time reading when I was a kid, and I used to fail my stuff and I had this teacher. She's a great lady. Named it was Mrs. Eaton. And I think she kind of noticed. We were reading the Diary of Anne Frank, right? Like everyone reads the Diary of Anne
Oh
Frank
yeah.
when they're in
Oh,
elementary school.
I hope they still do.
Yeah, well, me too. I don't know if they do. I guess I'll find out when my daughter gets to that age. But and I think she kind of noticed that when we read the book out loud in class, that I could remember everything that was said in the book, right? And she kind of brought me in because I was a latchkey kid. And so I would go to, for those of you who don't know what a latchkey kid is, you go to school early and you kind of stay there before school starts and you leave a little bit late, like on the bus. And so she's like, hey, I want you to try something for me. Right. And this is, we're talking the 90s here.
Hmm.
And so, like no one, right. There wasn't iPads or anything like that to help you with reading. There's all this stuff now, right? I'm like very jealous.
Oh yeah.
But she was like, "Why don't you read this for me?" And I'm like trying to pretend like I'm reading it, and and all this stuff. And like she's like, "You can't read that, can you?" And I was like, "No, I can read it." Like I'm really like trying to like hide my embarrassment about it. And she sat with me every day for a year,
Wow.
and taught me how to read, like slowly with my fingers. And it wasn't that I couldn't process it; they just all got jumbled.
Yeah.
And from that point on, like once I really learned how to read, I was off to the races. So I think the author I really first fell in love with was Roald Dahl. I probably read
Mm.
every single thing that guy ever wrote. The BFG, James and the Giant Peach, the Twits, like all the like really want our Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Charlie and the Great Glass Elevator, like all the short stories, and they had pictures in them, and they were just like that was a really good time for me because I was finally like starting to use my brain like in a lot, because I think there's a lot of good data out there from what some of my psychiatry friends tell me that like the earlier you teach your child to read and the more empathy they get, like for others. And
Mm.
I really feel like that's where I developed a lot of my empathy, like just for people in general. So
Wow. I love that. So what I'm hearing, guys, it's like you have a career now as a physician, and you've got a couple different specialties, and I love that. And one specifically because it rings with me. It's like, but to hear of your struggles with dyslexia and how you had that special teacher and how just because of that bump in the road, that didn't prevent you from doing any. The sky's still the limit. I love that's a story.
no, and I think good teachers make all the difference in the world,
Oh,
right? Like you have a good teacher, and that's one why.
absolutely.
Yeah, when I got to medical school, there were so many bad teachers. Like it was they were great doctors, but they probably weren't the best
I
because
had a
they're different skill sets for sure.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh my god, in college. I had this guy. He was a history teacher, and he sure knew his shit. Like he knew. I mean, you couldn't question the guy because you'd be shot down. He would know exactly what you're saying. But I remember the first day he was introducing himself, and I believe it was something like this: like, "Hey guys, we're gonna learn some." It was like history of some sort. It was like ancient histories of some sort. I don't remember exactly what it was. Uh, but I'm gonna teach you this. They only pay me $14,000 a year, so you're gonna learn what you learn. You're gonna do most of the work, and if you don't, I don't really care.
Yeah.
Like just all right, buddy. And like this is fun. I love that though. I always mess his name up. Raw Doll.
Roald Dahl, I think, is yeah, and he actually
He
passed away not too much after. He passed away in the '90s, I think. So, but his work is still being made into movies and like all that stuff.
one of the most influential pieces of his work that I had no idea that he wrote was that James and the Giant Peach. I remember I was born in '90, so I think that was the first movie I saw in the movie theater, and wow, what an impact it had on me. Kind of
Yeah.
dark.
Oh yeah, I mean like in the BFG, like I never saw the movie, but like I remember like he was like a smaller giant in comparison to the really big giants, but the giants used to like eat kids, like
Yeah,
if I recall correctly. So
I
yeah,
but I like how there's a certain aspects to those stories that aren't kind of told today. It's like, if you look into a lot of those fairy tales, guys, it's a little different than you were kind of grown up with. The story differs quite drastically. But I think it's important to dip into that history because it tells of the time. It tells of the stories and the themes that they wanted to portray. So thank you for bringing that up. Um, so I wanted to kind of touch on, what do you do day to day? And I know I usually don't ask this, but I think what you do is amazing, man. So
Oh, sure.
kind of dip into it a little bit if you don't mind.
No, that's okay. I am the director of Family Guidance Center. I'm a medical director there. It's a methadone clinic based in Toledo. And then I also teach at Mercy College. I actually just taught a lecture today on coronaviruses because I'm board certified in family medicine, and then I take my boards this year for addiction medicine. So I do both those. I generally prefer addiction medicine. The to Family medicine is a real tough gig these days. I don't know if I would, and I mean, being honestly, if people were going into medical school, I probably wouldn't tell them to pick that as a specialty.
Hmm.
So it's hard, it's grueling work, and it's I don't know how rewarding it is because about 70% of your time is spent away from a patient these days, either charting or arguing with insurance companies or all that stuff. So I
Wow.
I prefer addiction medicine. I prefer addiction medicine for a couple of reasons. One, my brother died from heroin, and two, I'm in recovery myself.
Hmm.
So I know, like, I'm good at spotting the bullshit that addicts throw at you.
Yes.
And they will throw it at you, and they'll use and that's, you talked earlier about like the manipulation game, like
Mm.
I've seen every trick in the book, right? Like the bartering, the
Just one more.
and playing on your emotions, like all this stuff. So, and because I've also done them too, right?
Yeah.
You
Put,
know,
I find so when I learned that about you, and I feel like a lot of people who watch me a lot know this, but yeah, I'm an addict. I don't use heroin anymore. I was an addict for quite some time. I'll always be an addict, but
sure.
um, I I used addiction medication, and I tell you what, it saved my life. It did. It gave me that opportunity to change my way of thinking, to not manipulate and lie and cheat and end up in institutions, jail, or dead.
Right. Oh yeah, I've heard that mantra from AA. So for me, it was, like most people in addiction, I'd say probably about 95% of my patients have significant trauma. And I'm not just talking about, like, they talk about micro and macro traumas, like that's like a big thing in addiction medicine and in psychiatry in particular, right? Like where the macro traumas are like the PTSD, victims of sexual assault, like those kind of things. And the micro traumas are just little aggressions over, and they both are terrible. Like I don't, but like I generally see the big ones, like who are rolling through the door with addiction. And I think a lot of people, addiction gets a bad rap, mostly because um, the way addicts behave when they're not doing themselves any favors. And it's hard to see that, like, this is a disease process, right? And there are certain things that just come with that disease: lying, cheating, like, stealing. Those are all directly related to the, like, what the initial cause is, but the initial cause is really the trauma,
Mm,
right? Like, because and then the drugs are the coping mechanism.
yes,
uh,
that's
and then your brain just gets adjusted to having it where you're just fighting to for a normal. the
mm,
and that was hard for me too, right? Like it's really hard when when you're just fighting to try to get to normal, and it sucks, right? Like I tell the families of my patients, and I've always, because they'll come in sometimes, and I say, listen, one of the things you don't realize is this person is, at this moment, they are doing the best they can, right? Like, like a lot of these, I mean, I've had patients trafficked in terrible conditions, like particularly the female patients, the and at that moment, that's what they're doing the best they can, and we're gonna try the best we can, but it's a hard disease to treat.
Ugh.
And right now, like the entire focus of addiction medicine is really harm reduction, right? Like
Yeah.
and that's a good thing. And I think there's some data that's coming out with the hallucinogenic studies like psilocybin and LSD, and they're finally starting to study those again because the ibogaine is another one. It's a tree from an African root that people mescalines and other.
Ayahuasca.
Yeah, like that, they have these, but they're just because they're Schedule 1 drugs, they're very, very hard to study. And also there's a lot of money to be made in medication assisted treatment. And that sucks, right? Like
Yeah.
so, there's gonna be a whole bunch of opposition to like anything that's a one-time treatment.
Oh my gosh, I'm glad you covered that because there's no better source. You know, you're in the game, and I want to say I like what you said about uh, what my experience was is I had gotten arrested and was forced to go through rehab, like a jail rehab, and you're locked up. I'm very thankful for that because it forced me to listen and change my thinking. And the medication was afterwards. Kind of the biggest part of like recovery is relapse. Like that happens a lot. And so I'm glad that people are talking about it, especially a guy like you. You see it every day, and man, I think you're doing wonderful work.
Thank you. It's tough. It's hard work. I've had to wrestle a few patients to the ground. So but you know,
Yeah,
if you just, I try to come. I really, having dealt with it on a personal level with my brother and with myself personally, like you have a lot of empathy for it and you understand, right? Like you can come from that place where it's you really just you want to help someone, and these are the tools you have right now.
I
They
think.
may be the best tools, they may not be the best tools, but these are what we have right now. So
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things that I see, because I still see like a an addiction doctor and like a psychologist, well, not a psychologist, but like a what do they call them? Like a therapy counselor, like a drug
sure,
therapy. Yeah. So one of the coolest things I think they're doing is hiring people who are in recovery. Because I have
yeah,
much more empathy for somebody who's going through that struggle than my wife does, who isn't an addict. So hearing those two different sides, and I'm not singling my wife out, I'm saying if you haven't been through that struggle, because it's not for like nobody in addiction wants to be doing what they're doing. Like it's an absolute terrible life. Like there's nothing fun about that.
it
So
totally is. Yeah.
so tackling that with the right people who have that empathy is I think very important and something I do see. I think people are coming around to beginning to find, and in Congress too, things are happening. So fentanyl, though, man, fentanyl.
It is that one, and the new one I've seen a lot of xylazine, which is like a horse tranquilizer.
Wow.
That one's hitting the street. The fentanyl really has become a thing because of the war on terror, right? Like 80% of our heroin imports were coming in from Afghanistan because there's poppies that grow all over that country. And when the war on terror basically shut down everything, right? Like it shut down the production from that country, they had to switch over to something new. And that was right around the time that the opioid crisis was really hitting its high, right?
Mm.
Like it wasn't until 2005, I might be wrong on that, where prescription overdose deaths really started going down. But towards the late 90s and the early 2000s, it was going wild. So you had like a perfect storm, right? You had the regular heroin that was not like that wouldn't just kill you the minute you took it. That was being cut off. All the people, like doctors, were decreasing the amount of opiates they were prescribing, and then you had fentanyl coming in from overseas. The really like most of the precursors from fentanyl are made in Chinese pharmacies.
Yeah.
And then they're shuffled over to Mexico, and then they're brought up through the border. So, but so you had this perfect storm where fentanyl really became. I've Narcan so many people I've lost count.
Oh, yeah. I
So it's
I
insane.
often tell my wife like if it wasn't for that wonderful drug. Me and you would not be talking, my friend. Not
Yeah.
even close. And it's I don't talk with like people hearing this right now. Like I don't tell people this stuff. So I love that you diving into it, and I think that it's very, very important work. Um, what you were saying too, I forget what. You ever have one of them brain fart moments? I have them all the time.
I forgot my wife's sister's name the other day. So yeah. So,
I love it. Well, I think basically what I was getting at is, man, I know we're here. We love books and talking about writing, but thank you for diving into that, because that's something that for me is personal and something that, man, I absolutely look up to. So you're doing wonderful work, and that's amazing because it saved my life. What you do saved my life.
thank you.
Absolutely. So diving back into the books,
Okay.
yeah. So when you started, were you a reader as you were? I know that, but I guess we kind of covered it a little bit. But I would love to know, because I want to add to my TBR, and the reason is I have a lot of the newer books. So, for instance, today I got like The Pariah from Anthony Ryan, Priest of Bones by Peter McClan. These are modern books.
Okay.
Do you have some classics that you could recommend me as far as some I should maybe study?
Sure. Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness was one that really kind of changed my mind. That's a grind. I'm going to be honest with you. That one's not, but I mean, they actually Apocalypse Now is like a remake of that book, right? But I think that the book that really changed my way of thinking, I had to do a project in undergraduate psychology, which was you had to read a book and you had to diagnose the character with like the main character with some psychological disease. My guy,
Wow.
for the book I read, he had bipolar 2, right? But it was called The End of the Road by John Barth.
Mm.
The and what I found really interesting about that book in particular was that when I look at most books, like I was a big fan of comics when I was a kid. So particularly around like middle school time, I was really into like there was like Maximum Carnage when he took over the city and like like all this stuff. And that was around the time that Superman quote unquote died, right? But
Yeah.
he went into a Kryptonian. I'm fully nerding out right now, but like he went into like a Kryptonian stasis, and it's all this ridiculous. And all the four guys came back. There was like the Steel guy and the Superboy guy or whatever, right? And but one of the things I found interesting, I did a paper in college where I compared Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird to Superman.
Oh, wow.
And the when I looked at those two characters, like one of the things that I noticed between both of them is that they never ever ever question their values.
Ooh.
Right? They always had this set moral code, whether it's like Atticus Finch or whether it's Superman, right? They have this moral code and they're going to live by this moral code and they're never going to question it. And you can't have Superman question a moral code because he's going to like destroy Earth, right? Like he has to have something that like grounds him. Unless, or I mean, if you don't, he ends up like Homelander, right? Like in the
Yeah.
boys. Yeah. So I always found that was interesting that there was like it seemed to be all the heroes that always had like this moral code, and I feel like that kind of goes all the way back to like the King Arthur legend, right, where they had like the chivalry stuff and this and stuff. So what I found interesting about that book, The End of the Road by John Barth, and it's like I think it's set in about the 60s and it's like a love triangle book. It's not fantasy or anything like that, but you have this character who is the antagonist and he lives by a set moral code, right? Like, and then you have this protagonist who really has no moral code whatsoever, but somehow he just always ends up doing what the audience feels is right. Right? Like, and it was just like the most interesting book because you had this guy who was like this bipolar guy, and he didn't really like he didn't understand the quote unquote villain in that story, like because he was just like so rigid and like so set by and like so he makes like he I think John Barth was almost making the point like if you set this like strong moral code like like and you're so unwavering that you become the villain. But it was always an interesting book and I feel like that really changed the way I thought about books. The Flannery O'Connor. She writes a short story called "A Good Man Is Hard to Find."
Oh, I just heard about that.
The
Brandon Sanderson. He talks about it.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic short story. Like you could probably get done with it in a half an hour, maybe an hour.
The
The
premise is totally unique.
It's very interesting. So, but I always liked her writing. There was a book written by Joyce Carol Oates that really I can't remember I think it's called Blackwater, but it's told from the perspective of the woman who was in the car with with Ted Kennedy when he ran it off to like when he ran it off the road and she died.
Mhm.
So I thought that was an interesting book. As far as fantasy, like I really liked The Once and Future King.
Oh,
That
I've never heard of that. The Once and
Yeah.
Future King.
So it's the King Arthur legend, but one of the interesting things, and this definitely has influenced and will continue to influence the rest of my story, but in that book, Merlin ages backwards.
Ooh.
So he basically, I mean, he's like a Benjamin Button character, right? Like he started off at the end of time and then he's like working his way back to the beginning of time. So and it starts off as kind of a kid's book. So if you've ever watched The Sword and the Stone,
Yeah.
the so The Sword and the Stone is like the first like kind of bit of that book, like where Merlin's trying to give like Arthur like kind of a magical childhood because he knows all the crap that he's about to go through, right?
Yeah.
And like so that whole like messing with time is like that's a big part of like one of the further bits in my story. Yeah.
I love that. And particularly, I'm reading another book right now. I'm almost done with it. It's called The Hand of God,
Okay.
and it's by the guy I was talking to last night. Uh, what the heck is his name? I can't remember his name. It's a wonderful, awesome name. I just can't remember. It's a very unique name. Yuval Kordov.
Okay.
Yuval Kordov.
I'm gonna have
Um,
to write it down. I just want to write it down so I don't forget it. The Hand of
y-
God. Okay.
yeah, so it's like this dystopian, dark sci-fi fantasy, dude. It's so unique, and he goes in between like So the story at first is being told in the perspective of Esther, who's a little girl, and the world's pretty much everybody's dead. There's some people still alive. Kind of you get that gist, but some crazy things have happened. Um, but she goes from dreams to kind of hallucinate. She's hungry. She's tired. And I absolutely, you touched on changing time and stuff like that. Now, I know it's not necessarily exactly how you were speaking of it, but I love that part of storytelling. And I had no idea. I'm coming across these different themes as I'm venturing farther into this journey of reading. That it just astounds me, man. So changing time, going in and out of dreams, hallucinations, but also being able to keep that um, cohesive in my head because that takes a little like experience, right?
Right. I think no one writes better. Like so, if you buy into what they call Everett's many world hypothesis, the which he's the kind of guy I like to think that Everett back in is a guy named Hugh Everett. He was a physicist back in 1957. He writes his paper, and he basically solves like he doesn't solve it, but he presents a an interesting answer to Schrodinger's cat paradox. Right, it's the
Oh,
whole and basically, because when they're doing quantum experiments and you get wave function collapse upon observation of the experiment, right, it goes like it fizzles, right? That's it. So he was like, well, basically every single particle, like every time it goes in an opposite direction, it creates a new universe.
oh my gosh, that's deep.
Yeah, I don't fully understand it, but if there's a guy who writes like with Everett's many world hypothesis in mind, it's Mark Lawrence, right? An impossible.
Oh yeah. So Schrodinger's cat's kind of, I mean, at the base of it, it's pretty simple. It's like, do you know exactly what it's like? You put a cat as a cat in a box.
You put a cat in a box, you put the box up, and what Schrodinger basically said is like if you're looking at quantum physics, the cat has the same likelihood of being dead as it does alive, right? So like if you look at like Everett's like many world hypothesis, but we always know the cat's alive every time you open the door. So it's a paradox, right? Like
Yeah.
so he's looking for an answer for this. But if you accept what Everett said is, that everything's branching off into these new universes, then there are just universes upon universes with dead cats everywhere. So
Oh God.
but I don't know if I buy into that idea. I read a book called Time Reborn by Lee Smolin. He's a physicist. He's pretty well known for quantum dot gravity. And he's
Ooh.
written a couple other ones like The Problems with Physics. And I think I agree with him that we're in one universe. And he said this thing that kind of blew my mind. And this is another thing that like kind of spawned like where I want to go with my books is like he's like, listen, he goes, what physicists believe, right, is that if you could take a snapshot of the universe, and you could see every single particle in that snapshot picture, right? Like so, and you knew the direction that every single particle was going. So one was going to the left, one was going to the right, and you had that picture with you, right? You essentially would be able to predict the every single event that ever happened or like
Wow.
backwards and forwards, right? Like because you know where every single particle is going, and you know how. So it's the idea of like predestination, right?
Ooh, yeah.
And I always found that very interesting. The and but it actually, if you watch a show called Devs,
Oh,
the
I haven't seen that.
yeah, it's done by the same guy who did Ex Machina, the
Ooh,
that movie, which was like the AI movie that I really liked.
yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, so same guy, but it's a limited series, and it goes over that concept, right? They even talk about some of the like wave pilot form stuff, and they take the view that Everett's many world hypothesis is right at the end, but it has Ron Swanson in it, the Nick whatever his name Offerman, and
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
I'll watch anything with that guy in it.
Yes.
So the
He's like witty and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and he was in The Last of Us in like the most touching episode of all time. Man, it was like him and that
Yes.
guy, and I was like, wow, he's really come
I have
away.
to I have to
Yeah,
say, I'm glad that you're touching on, and it's the first time on my channel too. It's like those theories that I really, I knew what the gist is, but found myself ever interested, like this ever present moment. It's like hearing these theories in college, and I didn't graduate with a degree. I got sick. I have Crohn's disease, which is actually the reason for the addiction. Like I had many surgeries, and
uh,
yeah, so I have an ostomy, and like I have
oh,
port
you
and
do?
everything. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So like I can't absorb water very well, so I do fluids every day. It's crazy.
that
Um,
sucks.
it's gotten much better. I used to be on 4 liters of TPN every night.
Holy crap!
Yeah, dude.
And your liver's okay.
My
The
liver's okay. Yeah.
Because TPN can really be very hard on your liver. So,
TPN never gave me any trouble. It never did.
well, for those of you who don't know what TPN is total peripheral nutrition. It's where you get all of your basically calories through an IV.
Yeah, so they took so much intestine out of me that I can't absorb what you guys do when you eat a cheeseburger. So I would get that through. I have actually like a line here, a port there.
Okay, yeah.
So all I take through that port now though is fluids. So I've my what I do have left has adapted, thank God. But yeah, so I don't really know where I was going with that, but yeah, man, I think that a lot of these theories that I found in school that you're touching on, it's fun. It gets your
It
mind
is.
turning.
I
It-
can't. I honestly like John he's a material science professor, and Mark is has a doctorate in mathematics. I can't keep up with the math, but I think I can keep up with the ideas for the most part. Like when it doesn't go too wonky, but the math is where I'm just like, wow, these guys are like another level of intelligence. It's insane.
that theoretical math is like it's theoretical. It's really just testing where can your mind go
Yeah.
because you're going to use like these algorithm is part of calculus. It's people know that from YouTube and Amazon, but an algorithm is just a math problem really with different subsets of options depending on your decisions.
I got up to Calc 2 and I was never happier to be done with the class. So I was like, that's what I need. I minored in chemistry, religion, and philosophy. So I had a weird set of, took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do. But I was just like, I never want to see another math book for the rest of my life. So
yes, calculus will do that. Like yeah, I got out of school before I finished calculus, but yeah, it was very it's difficult. It's hard to push your mind to a place that you know isn't really supposed to go there. Like math doesn't make sense at that point, but somebody invented that math to see how far you could push your head.
I mean, yeah.
So I would like a little glimpse, if you don't mind, into like your writing process. 500,000 words for is what you said you've been writing for a little bit now after this, and I think that's awesome. That ambition is something I'd love to hear about. Are you a pantser? Are you an outliner? You do daily word counts?
So I am usually a person like right now I'm writing the second book in the series that you read, which is technically the first book, but I thought I was going to be really clever when I came out with that book and make it number 4, like how Star Wars came out.
Like,
and then I realized how terrible of an idea that was later, but now I'm kind of stuck with that's the first book that I came out with.
So, entropy, right? Entropy.
Yeah, the whole thing is essentially about the heat death of the universe, which is like what physicists actually think, and how I kind of disagree with them on something. But so when I took a break, like I wanted to work on those things that like I didn't know what I didn't know, right? Like characterization. So I read a lot of books. I read on writing. I read Plato, which was The Secrets of the World's Best-Selling Author. Chago introduced me to some great books. One of the ones that really comes to mind on writing craft. I mean, I can tell you exactly what it's about, but I'm going to have to look it up here in a second. It is called. Let me see if I can find it.
It's fun. I like when people do it. We're live. Like this is absolutely what we do. We look stuff up. We do it what the hell we want when we're live.
Man, it was basically the concept of the book was like it's called Story Genius by Lisa Cron, and I found it to be a fascinating book because she says like, why do people tell stories? She starts off there, right? Like, why did these get passed down? And like, it's because like she makes the argument that you have this innate desire to find out what's going to happen because human beings have an innate desire to learn.
Right? Yes.
And to do that in an interesting way. So like I read all these like writing craft books, but for me, I would say I'm half pantser, half outliner.
Okay.
And I'm assuming by pantser you mean fly by the seat of your pants?
Yeah, just just dive in.
So I know always where I'm going. I know the beginning and I know the end, right? But I try to find I tried to be organic to get from point A to point B. So like I let that flow. So like in the book that I'm writing now, I'm really trying to work on the character bit. So I'm actually writing from a female's perspective.
I love that, dude. I do. I dig that.
It's very hard for me because I just have no frame of reference. So I've done like surveys of all my women friends, right, to see like what they hate and what they like what they hate in books and what they like in books. And I feel like that's very important to like.
It is.
And one of the things like when I wrote 100,000 words to it was a first person story. It was the one I wanted to enter for Spitbo, but it was called These Dark Reminders. And it was about a character who was basically like the wizards were the ruling class in that world, and he was not a wizard, and he was a serial killer, like of all of them, right? Like and so it like kind of took the whole reverse, but there like one of the things I would send some of that work to like some of my friends who are readers. And that it's funny because they said like some stuff flies and some stuff doesn't, and one of the things that really doesn't is like the male gaze portion of the book, right? Like when a guy's like ogling a female, And I found that was very interesting. And I asked my friend, she's actually like an NSA trainer and instructor division head,
Mhm.
and she's really into reading it. And I said, I was like trying to ask her, I'm like, why do you think that is? Like, because you can do a lot of like terrible stuff in books. Like there's like torture and rape and like,
Mm.
all this like murder, like
But
none of
it's
that,
that.
none, but the male gaze is the thing that really bothers readers. And I was like, and I asked her why. And because I was really trying to wrap my head around like, why aren't those all those other things offensive? And she's like, she kind of looks at me like, oh, pretty child, like,
Yeah, let
like
me tell you.
because I have no frame of reference for it. She goes, because we as women don't deal with that every day,
Mm.
right? Like we don't have to deal with like torture and all murder and all that stuff. But we do have to deal with the male gaze every day, right?
It
Like
hit home.
and it just like totally sunk into me. I'm like, oh wow, like, and I guess because I don't think like that, because I don't ogle women, and like, but I don't like, but women have to deal with that all the time. It's like part of their daily routine, and it's so obnoxious on so many levels that they don't want to read about it too. And I can't fault them for that, right? Like I wouldn't want to read it. Like if I'm reading a book, I'm trying to like get lost in a fantasy, and like I don't want to be reminded of stuff that like makes me there's a book that I read like before and after internship. It's called The House of God, and it's about a guy going through his internship year. And it was like I couldn't read it after my internship year because I'm like, I don't want to be reminded of all this. So
It's
it's
too
kind of that,
familiar.
yeah, it's kind of that same sense. So like in my attempt to write from like a female's perspective, like I just wanted to get to know my female friends. I use it as an opportunity to get to know my female friends like better, like to see what they deal with and what they like struggle with on it. That I just, it's like my wife is a physician too, and
Mm.
I was a student actually when she was a resident. So that's how
Oh,
we,
wow.
yeah. But I'm older than her, but I went through the training later than her because I was, I had two real careers before I was a physician. And I'll never forget, I went into a room with her, and because I'm not a sexist person, so again, I don't have really like I don't have a frame of reference for how hard it is can be for women at times. Like we went into this room, and this guy, like, this is before I even really knew her. This guy kept on like, he had all these questions, but he kept directing them at me, right? And
Oh,
I'm a third year medical student, right? And he keeps asking me these questions, and finally, I was just like, I literally was like, dude. I pointed to my wife and I was like, "You need to ask the doctor. I'm just a medical student, right?" Like, and
yeah.
I can remember my wife walked out of that room with me, and she had just this very curious look on her face, like, "I like him," right? Like
Yeah.
but it's kind of that stuff. Like, I'm just trying to get to understand, like, and I wanted to write from a real pretty woman's perspective, like a very beautiful woman, because I think it's actually like they get crapped on a lot too. Like I feel like a lot of women, like, they're only shown their value is by how good they look. And that's really like
Ooh.
a man's perspective, right? Like there's so many other good things, like women don't want to be treated like that. And I wanted to see what that there's like as an addict, right? Like you don't want to be treated like an addict,
Yeah,
right? Like,
dude.
but no matter what, you're going to be like put with that thing. And so that was like my challenge to write like the upcoming book. And you get to know like some of the good guys. Good is, I'm being generous there. But like and like another one of my main characters is a female in a wheelchair that like all the guys are terrified of, right? Like because like and like really serious dudes are terrified of this woman, right? And I wanted like a woman with no sex appeal. Like I wanted the pretty character, but I also wanted a woman with no sex appeal, like because I want I wanted to show the intelligence, right, of this
Mm.
like, character, like that all the guys are afraid of, right? Like because I don't
The
think
one
women,
that just doesn't take no shit.
right, like doesn't take any shit, and like is like they're like a mafia boss. They mean business, right? Like so I had like that's kind of where I'm at. Like But as far as, yeah, I know the end of the story, and I know like the beginning of the story, and I know where I want to go from A to B. But I try to be as organic as possible to get, and I know main plot points right in my head. But I'm kind of the person who starts writing, and I'm like, okay, what did I write about? What do I have in the room? What are the things that allow me in that room to get to the next plot point? Right? Like, so it's a good thinking exercise for me because writing's a real thinking game.
I dig that, and I'm glad that you kind of dived, whatever the word is, past tense. It's like you went into your what is important to you through this, man. So after reading this, which I was very impressed by, very thrilling, very fun. I can't wait to. I hope that you publish this, or at least maybe send it to me when you're done, man. Because
Yeah.
it's like one of those. I would love to see those themes explored by somebody, and I think they're important. And Curran, I agree with you, man. He's like, I like this guy.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. I like that you also touched in. Oh, sorry. I also like that you touched on that you are in the middle because I feel like that's where I'm discovering at the moment where I am.
Yeah.
Not a pantser because I can't keep things cohesive from day to day if I just pants. So if I know those main plot points, getting from A to B to C to D gives me that creative freedom, but I know where I'm headed.
Right. And I try to make sure that, like, so I read like the first 3 books of Wheel of Time,
Mhm.
and it's like I don't want to be that far between plot point A and plot point B. So that's like another thing. Like, I mean, like, dude, I was like, they gotta go from one place to the other, and there's like 200 pages, like, just to get
Yeah.
to. I'm more like the guy who like looks at the movie and is like, okay, they cut to the next scene. Like, what's happening now, right? Like, I don't need to skip them walking like 7 days in a forest. So
Yeah.
the I can appreciate that, but I don't think that would ever be my style. So
Yeah. Another I want to kind of bring up too is like I'm reading a book right now called Lord of the Shattered Lands by Andrew Jones. It's my first sword and sorcery. And the pace is, I told him because I was talking, I want to have him on the channel, but I told him I'd read his first 2 books before I had him on. His pace, it clicked with me. It inspired me because I was really at this point where I was like, I didn't want to sit down and try to write just because I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how to get where I wanted to get. And the pace that he sets in his book, the way that he does it, really inspired me. And I feel like that's kind of what you're saying. An epic, I love to read a good epic. I do. Every now and then I love a big chunker that's just, Wheel of Time style, but it's got a special time and place. But me as a writer, I need a little bit of a faster pace. I need to get
same.
from here to there a little quicker.
Uh, I think um, I think too, like when you look at some of like the classic books, like the I don't know, let's just take The Sun Also Rises, right? Or, and like all the like the Hemingway books, like I don't think these books would have even, made a single dent. And to because people are constantly they're just their minds are so distracted, right? Like in today's environment, because you have I think that the last thing I read was like the average person checks their phone once every 7 minutes.
Mm,
And
at
the
least.
yeah, and like the ADHD diagnosis are exploding. And the question is it really truly organic ADHD, which I believe people have. I've seen numerous people bouncing off the walls, right? And what type of ADHD is it? And like, is it the inattentive type or is it this? But the other question is like, is our technology like really affecting that? Right? I think
Yeah.
maybe to some extent it is. I think there's like a lot more data that's coming out like that says that. But I feel like it makes it harder for readers too, right? Because their minds are so distracted. So like to handle a slower pace, I feel like there's got to be some happy medium there, right? Like because they're so used to just everything in their face right now. Like, and here's a 5-second video, and here's another one, and you're just constantly being hit with information. So it's
Having
like
kids that watch that is the worst. It's like I don't know what to do about it.
Oh man, I try to keep mine off the screen. I mean, I feel like you can't take that stuff away from 'em entirely because then it becomes like forbidden fruit, and then that's all they're gonna want.
Yeah,
The
I'm so much with you on that.
but the other thing is like I very much have to limit her time because like she watched that Gabby's Dollhouse on Netflix, and it was like, man, she was zoned in like a zombie, and I
Yeah.
was like, okay, we're not doing this for 8 hours, So
YouTube Shorts, my 4-year-old, my oldest one, is just he's at the point he's very obsessive, and I can relate with him because I was that way as a kid too. But I didn't have YouTube Shorts to keep me endlessly constant, in this like frame of mind. And we limit it, but at the same time, it's like, do I prevent him from using what is essentially going to be maybe a work tool for him as an older adult? Like, I think there's a happy medium, and I'm trying to find that.
yeah, and I try to tell like a lot of guys that, and like one of the things that the data is really out on with electronics is like use of pornography, like how
Mm.
much guys are watching it. And I'll have 25-year-olds come into my office and they'll say they have erectile dysfunction problems. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like study after study in psychiatry is showing that it's real, like your brain gets mentally rewired to only become stimulated to that. The
That extreme stimuli.
Right, and that actually comes from they call it super stimuli. It comes from a work of a biologist called Nico Tinbergen, and he was a guy who experimented with that super stimuli, like where he could notice, like he could get birds to mate with like dolls, like that were birds, right? Like,
Wow.
that were models more so than they wanted to mate with the actual animal, right? Because he had figured out like what the signals were for that animal like that like stimulated it. So like some of
Mm.
the thoughts like in addiction medicine is that some of these like super stimuli like sugar, right, is a big one
Mm.
for addicts. The like gambling is another one. The pornography is another one. Like I don't make any moral judgments on it. What I like to do is I like to just say like, here's what happens, right? Like, and I've seen it time and time again. So but yeah, that's if you ever look it up, Nico Timberg, an interesting guy. He was a biologist who really studied like what those super stimuli were. So,
Wow. I'm definitely because I see two of them in my son. It's like he absolutely asks for sugar in the morning,
yeah,
which I don't give him. It's like I see these addictive behaviors just from my experience, and I'm at that point because he's my oldest. It's like the path that I took is absolutely not the path I want for him.
yeah.
So finding that happy medium, as well as that research and the data, is something I'm after as a parent too. I'm glad you touched on that.
So
Current,
I don't mean to go too far off the topic here. Like I know we're talking about books. I think that has a lot to do with how much less people are reading these days. So
no, so one of my favorite things is like, well, yeah, we've got that common interest of books, but like, man, this has been so much fun talking about. These are topics that I don't get to talk with like most people about. So this is absolutely just the most fun and knowledge. Like, getting that knowledge is absolutely what I'm after. What are you reading right now?
oh geez, so I just finished a book called Sight, or it's like the where these people live forever in the future, and but there's these sites that come through and they gotta like basically like clean off like or they call it gleaning in the book where they have to like kill certain people so to avoid overpopulation, right?
What's it called?
Scythe, it's a young adult book. It was Scythe.
Oh yes, I've seen that.
It was an interesting book. I liked it. I thought it was well done. It's definitely I feel like it's geared for a young audience, but I like those. I loved Harry Potter. Like I like
Yeah.
I like so and then so I finished that one, and then I really so I watched the show Foundation on Apple TV, right?
Yes.
And I love the dude who plays the Emperor, Lee
Oh
Pace.
yeah, dude.
That guy is just he is so good at playing an evil bastard, right?
He
Like
is.
he is in that whole like arrogance of like a god emperor kind of
It's like
thing.
don't. Oh, look at me!
Yeah,
I'm trying to throw my damn goggles off.
the
Yeah. He absolutely plays that dude, and he's got the hair for it.
Yeah, I mean, he's just like perfect, right? So I was really into that show, particularly that show was a slower pace show, right? Particularly
Yeah.
in the first like season. But man, it started to really pick up in season 2, right? And I was just like pumped. And then like the writer strike happened, and then I was looking up, I'm like, when's the next season gonna be on? Because I really liked it. And they were like maybe 2025, like because who knows with what all that stuff is
that
gonna.
sucks.
And I was like so irritated. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna get the book, the Isaac Asimov's Foundation. And I was like super excited because I wanted to know what happened next. I'm like, I can't stand waiting, And that book was good. I'm not knocking it. It was a good book, but it is so much different from that. It's not even the same like show.
Really?
I mean, aside from using some of the same names, like, I mean, I don't know where the show is going, right? Like, so, but they were just completely different books. Are they completely different stories? And I don't think, like, reading the book, like, now I realize I'm like, that would have been a really hard book to, like, make into a show, right? Because it's done in these 3 different time periods. And I think Asimov was going over the idea of like basically like the control centers of as humans evolved, like right, like one of the first ones is like religion, and then the next one is economics. And I'm excited to see where he was like going to go next, right? But man, the book and the show, I liked them both for different reasons, but they were just so different. So that was like the real last one. And then I read a lot of nonfiction stuff too. So I actually am starting the Quantum Supremacy by Mikio Kaku. I really like him. He's a theoretical physicist. So
Dude, they're like the most interesting people because their mind goes places where it's just not like human to go.
it's he like has a really good way of like explaining things. So I read the first book I ever read of his was The Future of the Mind. The And that was a really interesting book, and it's like kind of how far we've come in like exploring the brain, and like where we're at currently. And it was just a really interesting book, and he has a good writing style. So I'm interested to start this one. But yeah, so Foundation, Scythe, I think the next fiction one, I usually like rotate between a fiction book and a nonfiction. The nonfiction one currently I'm listening to is a really weird one called Talking to Strangers: The Adventures of a Life Insurance Salesman.
Oh, wow.
It's just a really like this guy's like a very interesting character. He's like he sells life insurance, but he has all these like really weird stories. Like he goes to Gamblers Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. That's like part of the book, and like he like started a pop band in the 80s, and he started the 9/11 foundation like over in Britain. All this stuff just through like knowing all these people by being a life insurance salesman. So I thought
that's crazy.
Yeah, so that's the one I'm on now, and then but then I'm my next fiction book is Tori's book, like the Bloodstones. I want to read that one. I always try to read those first. I like to read indie authors first, because I feel like there's so many good indie authors that like I try to, if someone recommends something to me or they're in the Patreon, I will buy it. I can't always say how fast I'm going to read it because but I will like eventually. So
have you started this journey yet?
I haven't. No.
Oh, buddy. If you like, it's like Wheel of Time, but faster paced in a modern prose with just the most badassery. It's just so. I read The Fall first, which is the prequel novella, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like let's go.
Okay.
Of Blood and Fire is book 1. I get this feeling in my stomach when I know there's like these band of brothers that are going on this fun adventure. There's elves, there's orcs, and just fun, man. And it's not like leaving you hanging. It's in a modern way. So I started collecting his hardcovers, which are just beautiful.
Okay.
Ryan Cahill.
Yeah, I've heard he's a super nice guy. Like everyone talks about like how just like a very good person he is. So yeah, I definitely like I have been meaning because he's been again. There's just so many authors, right? Like that are on my list that I feel like I can't keep up with it all.
If you like Chiago, like they're definitely not the same, but like in the same vein. It's an epic, and he writes big books, but they like so the one after this of War and Ruin is like 1,000 pages, and Mike from Mike's Book Reviews is like, I haven't read it yet, but you just talk. It's one of the fastest reads I've ever read. He's like, I just couldn't put it down. It's just so I think it says Ryan's done something for self-published authors, and I'm so glad he has like put that quality on the map, and because there's so much, and you're included in this. It's like people have that it's like, oh, they're not traditionally published. It must not be as good. Wrong. I've seen as good and better.
Yeah.
As self-publishing just doesn't have limits. And not only that, they're not put in boxes. You guys can write whatever the hell you want to write.
Right.
So yeah,
That is
so
nice. Yeah.
man, this has been so much fun. I've never covered such an array of topics, and I knew I would with you.
Oh,
And
thank you. Thank you for having me, man. I appreciate it.
dude, this won't be the last time as long as you're good with that. I would love to have you back on this year. So I've got some fun ideas in mind, and man, just what you're about, what you do, not only as a writer but as a physician, man, I can really relate with a lot of it. I love it. So thank you for letting me borrow you for a little bit and you talking on all those topics with me.
Oh, it was my pleasure, man. And I'd love to be back on, or I I always try to tell people that like in self-publishing, like I always try to help as much as I can. Right? This is hard. Like writing is a hard business. Particularly if that's what you want to do as a career, I fully applaud that. I think Bookborn is one. I think they run a charity
Yep.
where they have, and I it's my intention to like when I'm like a little bit more further along to see if I can help out with that in some way. Just because I've really liked getting to know everyone I met. They're just all like really nice people, like
Yep.
and they're trying to do something that's creative and good. And like when you look at Hollywood that's out there now, it's just the same freaking story over and over and over again. And I get like with COVID, they're trying to just look for hits, right? Like I mean, they got to get people to the theaters and yada yada. But there's just so much good stuff out
There's
there, and I'm just glad to like know the people.
Yeah, man, and I totally dig that. Like they do a like a self-published like it's like a donation like a fund for, and they pick a winner, and I forget who won it this year. Who was that?
I don't know. Yeah.
I just seen it, but anyway, they do wonderful stuff. Zach and Bookborn. But yeah, man, I just had such a good time, and I'll have you back on. I've got some fun ideas I want to shoot to you soon.
All
And
right.
thank you guys for being here in the chat. It's been a very meaningful conversation for me, and I appreciate all of you guys being here in the chat. For you guys watching the future as well. So tomorrow, I'm talking with Colin from Colin's Corner on episode 2 of BookTube and Beyond. That's what I've called it, where I talk to some other booktubers. And then the day after, I will be talking at 4 p.m. Eastern with Matt from Matt on Books, another booktuber. So those will be fun. Tune in for those. And I always have to say like, share, subscribe. That always helps me and the authors that I have on the channel. And thanks, guys. We will see you tomorrow.
I'm sorry I didn't answer any. By the way, I just found that I forgot to join the chat. So there were a lot of questions. One was like there was a textbook. They're all like medical science stuff like behind me. Someone said their TV read is a nightmare. I agree with that.
I wanted to throw one up too. Ryan, he's wonderful sci-fi author of Lost Souls. That's the name of his book. And we were talking about addiction. He was saying he was proud of both of us for advancing ourselves and becoming great men.
Oh, thank you. That was very nice of Lost Souls. I just want to make sure I write down his book.
Dude, it's good.
But yeah, sorry if I missed any questions. I was not meaning to be rude.
I threw up the ones that were, well, a lot of the times too, it's like I try to do my best, but a lot of the times the context is within the chat themselves. They're like talking to each other. So if I find one that's got a good question, I'll throw it up. But yeah,
Okay.
you didn't miss anything as far as question. I don't think.
Okay.
Of course, I'm not the best at doing this yet, but
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I apologize if that's if I missed anything. So
by the way, if you're ever on like another podcast, which I'm sure you will be, it's like that's up to the host, man. If he misses a question, you better hold him on it. Say, look, dude, you didn't throw that up.
okay.
But hey, thank you so much, Josh. Thank you guys that were here live, and thanks for the ones that will watch in the future. We will see you tomorrow at 9 p.m. Eastern.
All right. It was so nice meeting you, Matt.
Absolutely. You too, brother.
Bye.